We are 84, 85. I think we can start. So my name is Wasim, everyone. I'm the Stabilization Academy Coordinator at the Crisis Bureau. I'm being joined today from Dakar directly by Sarah Zing. Sarah is one of our resource persons on stabilization. And we have JJ, also another resource person from UNDP on stabilization. We also have Shay and Elsie joining us from the Crisis Bureau in New York. Hi, Elsie. Hi, Shay, as our Vibes Officer.
Hi.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this first round. We're going to have some fun today. We're going to start with a quick video on stabilization and Stabilization Academy. This video was made specifically for this event. It's the first time that it is aired. We're going to continue with some introductory messages. We're going to play some games with opportunities for all of you to earn some tokens for the big prize that was mentioned by Jan Thomas earlier in the breakout in the plenary session. And we're going to end up with some key takeaway messages and open the floor for your thoughts, your interventions, your questions, anything you would want to mention. Thank you, everyone. Again, we're 117 participants in that breakout session. And Elsie, if you can run that short video on stabilization, please. Over 100 million people were forced to flee their homes due to conflicts, violence, fear of persecution, and human rights violations. But when a community finds liberation from violent conflict, and political settlements establish a basic level of security, what makes people want to come back home? That's a development challenge we can tackle. Business as usual is not an option. Through a stabilization approach, UNDP lays the foundation for long-term peace building and development.
Any time lost in building the foundations for people to return is space created for them to join violent extremists.
We work with speed, rehabilitate at scale, and re-establish government presence, all while ensuring that people feel safe enough to come back. This approach has helped communities in Iraq, Libya, the Lake Chad Basin, the Liptako-Gourma region, Mozambique, and many others. Through Stabilization Academy, UNDP is preparing stabilization professionals working in Africa and the Arab world. Learning starts with induction, continues through the community, and finds solid grounds in crisis deployments, supporting the expansion of state presence and services to stabilize communities, creating the conditions in which development responses become possible again. Thank you, everyone. We're reading through your messages. Thank you for your participation. We're seeing participants from all over the globe, and that makes us very happy. I'm gonna leave you with a few minutes with our resource person, JJ, to give some key messages about stabilization, the importance of stabilization.
Thank you, colleagues. What a great pleasure to see everybody. There is many new faces, but also some faces that I haven't seen in ages.
We don't hear you very well. Please speak louder.
Similar to the video, Stabilization then is a UNDP program.
We can't hear you properly, unfortunately.
Don't hear very well. Please speak loud and start again.
Wasim, maybe push the computer a little nearer to JJ, please. We could hear you properly, but not JJ. Thank you.
Okay, here I am. Can you hear me now? And I am now going to scream and shout out loud.
Perfect.
Excellent, excellent. Loud and clear. Loud and clear.
Was that it was great to see some really familiar faces and to see many new faces. We are just so excited to have you here with us. Now, let me pick up where the video left off. So stabilization for UNDP is a programming as well as a political approach that UNDP uses after violent conflict has ended. In in defining and designing stabilization programs, that there are many questions that need answering, but one central question that we always ask as we go into countries and as we define a stabilization program is, under what circumstances does a head of family, a he, a she, somebody who is trying to bring her family back to normalcy, what does it take for that person to make a decision to actually return to where they originally came from and were displaced by conflict? And stabilization experience throughout the many years that UNDP has been doing stabilization programming point in three directions. Firstly, a head of family wants to make sure that his or her family is secure. It is all about security and ensuring that there is security. So stabilization programs are characterized by a very strong link and close collaboration with a country's security forces. As some of the people here have been working explicitly on that, I'm sure we'll be hearing from them. Secondly, of course, is a head of family would want to make sure that his or her children actually can attend schooling, have access to health and clinics. So making sure that there is social and productive service delivery guaranteed in these communities extremely important. Under stabilization, UNDP in parallel rehabilitates what has been destroyed while negotiating governance presence. It's about re-establishing state presence. Then lastly, and very importantly, of course, is we need people to have money so that they can actually buy food and that they can actually get going on their lives again. And that is the third very key answer to a question when we design a stabilization program. How do we get money in people's pockets? This is not something that we try to guarantee long-term, but it is in these early stages. How do we get people to be able to buy food for their families? How do we make sure that the children can go to school, that the family can access health services? And very importantly, how do we make sure and how do we negotiate properly with the authorities that there is security in communities? Now, from here, back to you, Wasim.
Thank you very much, JJ. So I think we're gonna move to our games. So you have Shay that has shared a link in the chat box. If you can please access that link, and that will enable you to participate in the games. And if you have listened carefully to what JJ have said, that will allow you also for sure to earn some tokens while responding to the questions during the games. Elsie, are you sharing your screen? Thank you, Elsie. Already 52 people have joined the game. We're gonna wait for a little bit before starting. Give some time for our 140 participants to join in. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're already 92 participants in the games, and we're gonna start. We'll have 4 questions, and the first question will be about your email address, the email address that you have used to join this meeting, to register to the Crisis Academy launch. So please enter that email so that the tokens that you will earn will register in your name. We have 50 seconds to enter that first question. Already 50 people have answered. Thank you everyone for participating. This is just the beginning. Give it another 35 seconds. seconds for around 15 participants to answer so that they can earn tokens for the rest of the questions.
I need help with getting into the game. I can't sign it in.
Excuse me, Joanne?
I need help with getting into the game.
Okay,
Sorry.
did you?
Me too. I'm completely confused with this game. I don't understand how to join and take part.
I couldn't join the game.
I had
Okay,
the same
so
issue.
I'm gonna repeat again. There was a link that was
We have
shared.
the same problem.
Okay, so there was a link that was shared in the chat box by my colleague Shay. The link says quizzes.com. So this is where you should be able to click and join the game. If you were not able to do that, that's fine. You can just follow on the screen that Elsie is sharing, and that's completely fine. So Elsie, we can move to the second question, please. So, ladies and gentlemen, after or during a violent crisis, the head of household considers to stay home or come back home if the following conditions are met. So here you have several options to choose among. This is a multiple choice question. So you can choose security, housing, social services, livelihoods, legal documents. 20 seconds to go, and we have more than 50 answers so far. Seconds, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. You have to click the box for the right answers. Thank you. Time is up for that second question. And we can see here the results. We have a few wrong answers, but that's completely fine. We have lots of colleagues who have mentioned security, housing, social services, and livelihoods. We want to go to that other view, Elsie. That's fine. So I'm going to leave the floor to JJ again to elaborate a bit on this. Thank you, JJ.
Thank you, colleagues. And I shall again scream and shout as loud as I can. Really happy to see that that a lot of people indeed picked up on security, on housing, on social services, and on livelihoods. Legal documents, it was a bit of a trick question. Of course, legal documents are important, but we tend to focus more on legal documents in the durable solutions methodology and approach, where that is something that our humanitarian colleagues consider of great importance. In stabilization, it is not something that UNDP typically works, which doesn't mean that legal documents are not extremely important, but stabilization is a very short-term approach that exclusively focuses on how to get people to return to their place of origin and have some sense of normalcy. For that, of course, you absolutely need to have a roof above your head, to have some access to social services, such as health and education, have some money in your pockets, and of course, importantly, feel that there is a sense of security. Thanks.
Thank you again, JJ. So we're gonna move with Elsie to the third question about stabilization. So business as fill in the blank is not an option when implementing a UNDP stabilization program. So you have to fill in the blank for this question. Again, I'm gonna repeat, business as is not an option when implementing a UNDP stabilization program. We have already 77 answers and 20 seconds left. So please put in your answers.
I was between the main screen and the quizzes, so I could not move.
Yeah, that's a common mistake that we all do. So please focus on the link where you have clicked and not on Elsie's screen when you want to answer the questions. So we have now 92 answers here, among which 84 are correct. And I'm gonna leave you with our famous Sarah Zing to elaborate a bit on that. Business as usual is not an option.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you. Thanks so much for joining. So business as usual is not an option. That's the right response to this question. Stabilization is a unique intervention. It's neither development nor humanitarian. There's a few things that make stabilization so unique, and I'll go through 6 of them. So first of all, we work very closely with security forces. The #1 criteria we use before we even decide to go into an intervention site is there security, but not only for UNDP and our partners to be able to intervene, but also the security and safety required for the population to come back. And if the people have stayed in that town, for them to be able to resume their lives. And the same goes for the local authorities. We want them to come back, establish themselves, provide the social services that are needed, and to actually stay. Second, stabilization is political. So we work very closely with the government. We collaborate with the government. We are behind the government, working with them to improve the social contract. So clearly not neutral in its approach. Third, UNDP stabilization approach is about speed and scale that you have heard. So speed, meaning that once a zone has been liberated, we make sure that we move in with speed to make sure that that zone stays liberated and is not run over by armed groups. But we also want to move in with speed to enable the government to provide the social services required for the population to resume their lives. And at scale, meaning that obviously the more sites that we can cover, the more sites we can link through roads and across borders. If we are intervening with stabilization in regional areas where there's cross-border overlaps in terms of insecurity. So we connect the intervention sites through the borders. Also very important when we talk about scale. 4, stabilization cannot work unless the highest management of UNDP is involved, not only in engaging with the government and the security forces, but also to make sure that the team works at speed at all times. 5, we also work very closely with partners, the donor partners. Stabilization is a very risky endeavor, and we do share the risk jointly with donors, and we are in constant touch with them. We have a very open, frank communication, and we make sure that if something goes wrong, that we communicate this with the donors as soon as possible, and that we find solutions together. And lastly, there's a need for finger on the pulse. The situation changes tremendously fast. They're very complex situations. So we have to make sure that we have people on the ground and we know the context, how the context is changing in terms of the conflict dynamics, the security risk, but also the progress of the interventions. Everything is very fast speed, and we have to be there constantly, and all the colleagues working on stabilization have to have this in their mindset, the finger on the pulse and speed. Over from my side.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for telling us what makes stabilization so special and so different, and what do we mean while we all say that business as usual is not an option. Ladies and gentlemen, we still have a few minutes for one last question. So if you haven't done so well in the previous ones, this is your last chance. Elsie, we're gonna move to the last question, please. Stabilization responses aim to build the foundations for longer-term peace and development by doing the following. So here again, you have to choose among the different options. This is a multiple choice question. So you have the options as follows: rapidly scale up government delivery, reduce insecurity, tackle the root causes of conflict, provide short-term livelihood opportunities, and strengthen social contract. We already have 50 answers and we have like 25 seconds to go. So please choose the right boxes for that question. Seconds to go, ladies and gentlemen. We have 100 answers. Thank you very much for your participation in this game. This was the last question, and I can see from the screen that we have some very good answers. I'm leaving the floor again for Sarah to elaborate a bit on this last.
Great, thank you. So indeed, most answers have been correct. There are a few red ones having chosen the wrong box. So I'll go through them. So again, stabilization, the end goal for UNDP and stabilization is to improve the social contract, the trust that the local population has in the government. And we do this with a 3-component approach. And then Jay has mentioned them before. So first of all, the security and the safety, which is key. And we do that through different types of interventions. Again, we work very closely with the security forces. We advocate for them to go to the places where the decision has been taken by the government to intervene. And we provide equipment and other support, including training for them to be able to secure the population. We train them in human rights, and we also work closely with the local communities in early warning. The second component is the delivery by the government of social services, and the UNDP supports the government in rehabilitating social services, the infrastructures. There can be a school, it can be a health center, it can be a water point or houses. And what we always try to do is to build back better. Which means that where possible, we connect it with solar energy. If it's a health center, we advocate for the inclusion of separate room for survivors of sexual violence, things that might not have been there before, so building back better. And third, the component of livelihood opportunities, and here it's important to stress that it's short-term, it's emergency in money and support for the local population to resume their lives, for the local economy to get a kickstart. It's mostly cash for work. It can be cleaning the town, it can be maintaining the infrastructure, and so on. And here we have a huge focus on women and female-led households. The one thing that we don't aim doing with stabilization is longer-term development and peace building. So we are not there to tackle the root causes of conflict. This is much longer term. It requires a very deep, thorough understanding of the situation on the ground. This takes time. And the interventions, as you know, to sustain and build peace and longer-term development are really longer-term, and that goes beyond stabilization. So what stabilization does, it creates the foundation for longer-term peace and development interventions to take hold.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for this intervention. So this is the end of the game section of this short meeting. Maybe we're gonna have a view where we can see who has earned the most tokens for stabilization. Just a second, ladies and gentlemen. So we have Yuko, who's our leader with more than 3,000 or 3,350. Yes, and we have also Lillian Dawa. Lillian is from a UNDP colleague from Nigeria. So congratulations, and we have very good results from many colleagues. So thank you very much for participating. You'll have the opportunity in the after the second round to see who has won the most tokens among the different rounds and the different breakout sessions. Thank you very much again. Before I leave the floor for questions, for interventions, for testimonies, I'm going to leave you with a few key takeaway messages on stabilization and with Sarah Zing again.
All right, so quickly summarizing what you have just heard. So stabilization for UNDP, it's time-bound, it's not long-term, it's localized, integrated, and it's a civilian intervention. Even though we work closely with security forces, we're purely civilian. It's about creating the minimum conditions of security. It's about providing the infrastructure for the government to deliver social services, and it's about short-term emergency livelihood opportunities. The overall goal is to improve the social contract. So again, the trust that the local population has in the government, and ultimately for development and interventions to be able to kick off. The 3 S's are essential in stabilization for UNDP: speed, scale, and social contract. So again, speed and scale are on the operational side, and the social contract is what we aim to achieve. So it's the results that we want to see on the ground. Even though we work with speed and at scale, we never compromise human rights, community security, gender equity, and social cohesion. It's very important to underline. Also, stabilization is not meant for all contexts. There are a certain list of criteria that has to be met before we decide that the intervention is ripe for stabilization. One of them, that the social contract has to be weak. There has to be active armed opposition to the government. The government has to be interested in improving the social contract. Security forces have to be interested, and they have to have the capacity to provide the security that is needed. And lastly, we only intervene in areas that are of return that's voluntary. And lastly, to conclude, the 2 key indicators that we use to measure if we have been successful are the number of IDPs who have returned to sites that have been stabilized, 1, and 2, the perception of the local communities of the security. How do the locals feel about the security? Are they secure? Are they safe? And how has it improved over time since the intervention has started? So those are our 2 key indicators that we use to conclude and say stabilization has worked. And we have had quite some good positive results and success in the different countries where we have intervened with stabilization. And currently we are speaking to you from Dakar, where we're having a huge stabilization event with the different colleagues from the Lake Chad Basin and Liptako Gorma, sharing lessons learned and improving what we do and aiming for even better results.
Thank you again, Sarah. So we're leaving the floor open for interventions, testimonies from UNDP stabilization projects, and for questions, of course. I'm following up on questions that we are receiving in the chat. And I'm going to leave the floor to Lillian for a first intervention. And go ahead, Lillian.
Okay. Thank you, Wasim. Yeah, so I'm Lillian Dowher. I work with the Regional Stabilization Facility in the Lake Chad Basin. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
In the Lake Chad Basin, which is being implemented in Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. As JJ and Sarah have nicely put it, there are 3 key intervention areas, which are the security, basic services, as social services, as well as the livelihoods aspect. And these 3 pillars need to interact consistently for stabilization in the area. As For the livelihoods, which I and my colleague are the lead on that pillar, what we do are different interventions such as that are mostly for cash injection into the community and for restarting the socioeconomic systems within those areas. One of the areas that which we've worked in is called Banki, which shares a border with Cameroon. In terms of the scale, as Sarah has said, the work that we do, we try to ensure that there's synergy between the UNDP offices and the governments on both areas. The interventions are identified jointly together with the government. For what we first did when we moved into this particular location called Banki was cash for work, to ensure that there was some funds going around within the community, while the other interventions and the security aspect and the basic service carried on with the construction and the trainings for the security outfits and deployments to the community. And then we also had business cash grants to the community, to some beneficiaries within the communities, to kick off trade, which had initially been stopped due to the insurgency, and then working in collaboration with the other infrastructure pillar, ensuring the construction and rebuilding of the market structures. We do less of trainings because as they've nicely said, the development aspect looks more into that. So we target people that already have some existing skills that were destroyed or disrupted due to the insurgency. And we have some assets revitalizations in terms of agriculture, assets and livestock, and some fish production. So those are the examples of some of the works that we've done. And to ensure, as Sarah has said, there's lots of monitoring to see that the target and the social contract is being met. For livelihood, sometimes it's a bit more difficult in terms of the association of the livelihood intervention with the government. So that's part of what you need to continue working with the partners and with the government to ensure that the association of the support that's being given by UNDP and the stabilization facility is associated with the government. So that's it for me. Thank you, Asim.
Thank you, Lillian, for this testimony from our work in Nigeria. I'm going to take a question from the chat and leave the floor after that for Gerhard and Angelica for their questions. So one of the questions that we received in the chat is about social contract and how can we do that without addressing the root causes of conflict. So I'm going to leave you with an answer from JJ on that.
Well, that's a nice and easy question that you're posing there. Thank you very much for doing that. On a more serious note, one of the things that we find in stabilization as extremely important is to bring people first back to a sense of normalcy. And that requires the conditions that we have mentioned before. Does that address the root causes of the conflict? In some cases it may, it mostly does not, which is why the moment stabilization starts, other areas of UNDP country offices who work on issues such as development problematics, who work on issues related to peace building, which of course has an exclusive focus on tackling the root causes of conflict, come in parallel. So while stabilization works on trying to bring some normalcy, get people out of camps or host communities back into their area of origin, in parallel, the work on the root causes with peace-building colleagues and development colleagues starts. Do you want me to do the MHPSS one?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, then there was a question on mental health and psychosocial support, which I hope is what MHPSS means in the question. This is an extremely important question because people more often than not, unfortunately, may suffer great trauma, and people who suffer trauma have a really hard time to get back to what we think is so important, is normalcy. So often we are blessed with humanitarian support in camps on mental health and psychosocial. It is not something, again, that stabilization does. Stabilization provides the minimum conditions for people to return to their communities. In parallel, we need a whole lot of other actions to be taken place. So mental health and psychosocial support normally is not part of stabilization programming. Over to Wasim.
Thank you very much, JJ. I'm going to take a question or an intervention from Gerhard. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for hosting this session. Very interesting and very innovative. Really like it. So when you talked about the criteria, the one word that did not come up in the criteria was the word legitimacy. So I was wondering where you see the legitimacy of a government or of security forces for stabilization, because more frequently than not, the security forces might have been a party to the conflict in one way or another. So their reaction, at least to a certain group of the population, might also affect the overall stabilization efforts. So basically just wanted to understand where legitimacy factors into stabilization efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerhard. I'm going to take another question from Angelica before we answer both questions. Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say, Sarah, it's really nice to see you. I took over your work here in IOM, so I'm happy to see your face again. I wish you were still working more with us. I really enjoyed this session, and I want to highlight, of course, because I work a lot on the humanitarian development peace nexus, and I see there are strong links between stabilization and the nexus, i.e. the nexus is about collaborating. It's about doing joint analysis and joint programming, and also having cost-efficient financing, of course. And starting with the people's concerns and working, of the needs. So you would have to adapt every program to the reality in each context. And I assume that's the same with stabilization. I also assume that you work on your stabilization approaches to enhance resilience and the SDGs. So SDG 17, which is also very nexusy, which is collaboration. So can you talk a little bit about how you work with other stakeholders around stabilizations, the other UN agencies, but also I presume civil society and private sector, because we're in this together and we need to work as one UN and as one planet and one humanity. So that's a little bit of comments, but also a bit of questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Angelica, for this important question. Just to flag that we still have a maximum of 5 minutes to take questions and answer them. So I'm going to leave the floor for JJ to answer Gerhard's question.
Gerhard, thank you for your question on legitimacy. I mean, we had exactly 3 minutes to introduce stabilization, which is not nearly enough. And the interesting part, Gerhard, is we just ran out, as Sarah was saying, of a meeting where we're meeting with 6 countries where UNDP is doing stabilization. And one of these countries that shall for now go unnamed raised the issue of legitimacy. If there is not a legitimate government and UNDP in stabilization is aiming to strengthen the social contract between people and the government, then that's context is not a stabilization context. Stabilization is not anything kind of goes approach. It requires certain conditions to be met. And one of them is a relatively legitimate government and relatively legitimate security forces, as we have stressed so much. So by answering your question, I'm also answering another question, and that is stabilization is not for all contexts, and context is extremely important in stabilization. Thanks for that question, Gerhard.
I also will make a few points combining some of the questions that were asked. So first of all, and this is also goes to the mental and psychosocial support. So we, and to Angelica's question on coordination. So we do coordinate with other actors. It has to be said that in a lot of times we intervene in places where there are no other actors, that the context is not secure enough. So there are no development actors on the ground. Sometimes also there are no humanitarians, so there's no access actually. So the coordination is more with the local actors on the ground and government and so on. However, we have a strong dialogue that's happening with humanitarian actors for situations where there is possibility to find synergies, to do joint analysis, especially the context risks and identifying mitigation measures. And the same goes with the, mental health and psychosocial support. So we try to understand who is on the ground, if there are issues that are brought up to colleagues on the ground, for them to know where they can refer survivors to. So are there other agencies, NGOs, who's on the ground, who provides those services, who can we refer them to? And lastly, on the question on success, and also linked to the social contract. So we have number of cases where the perception surveys show that the perception of the government has gone up, the perception of the security has gone up, especially in the Lake Chad, where we have been a bit active longer than in Lipta Kogorma. And the population, there are questions that are posed that show that the population attributes what has been done to the government, and that there is an improved relationship with the government. So it is working, and we do have data to show that there has been success.
Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes left to close this interesting session. And unless we close, we're gonna just automatically brought back to the plenary. So I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining us in the Stabilization Academy today for this launch. After this, you're gonna be able to choose among three academies for round 2. So you can choose the HDP Nexus Academy, you can choose the Search Data Hub Academy, or you can choose the Prevention Academy, depending on your preference and on what you have registered before. For the Stabilization Academy, would be really happy to stay in touch with you. So you can contact us through the stabilization@undp.org email address. We'll make sure to respond as soon as possible. And as a reminder, please don't leave after this session. There is another round, and then there is an official ceremony with hopefully the administrator of UNDP who will be there as well.